What if everything you thought you knew about orcs was a lie? For ages, they've been seen as the embodiment of evil, creatures born only to destroy. But what if their story is far more complex? What if these feared beings, cast into darkness, are not just monsters, but victims of unimaginable torment? Perhaps they are not the villains we've always believed, but tragic figures shaped by a cruel fate. Before you cast them aside, consider the possibility that their tale is far darker and far more human than we ever imagined. One of the most overlooked aspects of orcish existence is the constant, crippling fear they live under. Orcs are not just driven by violence, but by an ever-present terror that governs their actions. From the time they were twisted into darkness, they've lived as pawns to Dark Masters, first under Morgoth and later under Sauron. Their lives were ruled by these tyrants' unyielding control, their every step shadowed by the threat of brutal punishment. This fear is not merely physical, it's psychological. Orcs are bound by an ingrained terror of their superiors and the consequences of failure. In The Lord of the Rings, we see how Sauron's orcs fear him more than their enemies. Their fear of punishment is so great that it drives them into battle not out of loyalty or belief in their cause, but out of sheer terror of what awaits them if they disobey. They have no choice but to follow orders, even when doing so means certain death. Unlike other races of Middle-earth, orcs are never truly free. Their existence is one of survival under oppression. This fear has warped them, making it nearly impossible for them to act independently or show any mercy. Their brutality, then, is as much a product of their fear-driven existence as it is of any natural inclination towards evil. They are as much victims of this relentless cycle as they are agents of it. Makes you think, how much of their savagery comes from an innate desire to destroy, and how much comes from the constant terror of what will happen if they don't obey? As we begin to explore the tragic nature of orcs, the first revelation is truly chilling. Orcs were not born into evil. They were brutally forged in it. Morgoth's Ring and the Silmarillion expose the beginnings of orcs in a few details. Orcs were once elves, beings of purity and potential, captured and twisted by Melkor, the first Dark Lord. Tolkien reveals in the Annals of Ammon the vile origins of these creatures. Imagine the torment. Innocent beings, first of Ilúvatar's children to awaken, twisted and broken until all that remained was darkness. Their transformation was a violation of the highest order, stripping them of their dignity, their identity, and their place among the children of Ilúvatar. These elves, who might have walked paths of wisdom and grace, were instead plunged into a nightmarish existence, their noble hearts blackened by relentless suffering. Their torture went beyond physical mutilation. They were spiritually mutilated, their innate goodness buried beneath layers of forced malice. Yet some argue that this origin story does not absolve the orcs of their deeds. Over time, they have become the very monsters they were shaped to be, fully embracing their corruption. This perspective insists that the orcs, long severed from their former selves, have committed atrocities so vile that they are beyond redemption. Their actions, marred by relentless cruelty and bloodshed, suggest they are not just victims, but active participants in evil. The orcs desperately yearn for a place in the world, a quest born from the torment of their origins. Twisted into monsters by Morgoth, the orcs are left with an aching need to belong. The Lord of the Rings subtly acknowledges this, where orcs, even in their violence, express desires for food, rest, and a twisted sense of camaraderie, showing they are not entirely devoid of individual needs. This longing reveals that orcs, despite their fearsome nature, crave something universal, a place to belong. Their brutality can be seen as a response to a world that has cast them out, offering only scorn and rejection. Exiles in their own right, they cling to the desolate lands left in the wake of ancient battles, forging a semblance of home in places forsaken by all others. In these barren territories, they fiercely establish their own space, driven by a profound need for belonging, even if it's steeped in darkness. But this quest for identity carries a darker undertone. Some argue that the orcs' desire for a place in the world is not a search for peace, but a campaign for domination. Their longing for a home is inseparably tied to violence, suggesting that their pursuit is not for refuge, but for control. Tolkien often portrays orcs as creatures who destroy rather than create, spreading darkness wherever they go. This interpretation sees their quest for belonging not as a tragic search, but as an extension of their inherent corruption, a drive to impose their will on the world, carving out a place through ruin rather than peace. This darker view aligns with Tolkien's broader depiction of orcs as beings tied to the forces that created them. In The Lord of the Rings, orcs, despite their desires for comfort and rest, remain bound to their nature as instruments of ruin. Their efforts to establish a home are marked not by creation but by destruction, showing that their need to belong is as destructive as it is tragic. Fully underlining the destructive and tragic nature of orcs is the unsettling truth that they weren't born into evil. They were shaped into it by dark powers. In the Silmarillion, Tolkien describes how Morgoth twisted captured elves by slow arts of cruelty, turning them into orcs. They weren't naturally evil, they were forced into it, their identities shattered and rebuilt as instruments of malice. This coercion defines their existence. Orcs are not agents of their own will, but puppets of dark forces, their brutality a direct result of the torment they endured. Every act of cruelty is a survival tactic under the oppressive weight of their masters. They live in a world of torment, driven by fear, pain, and the commands of their creators. This portrayal makes them more than mere agents of evil. It shows them as tragic figures, forever bound to a dark fate by the very forces that corrupted them. Closing in on the top of the list is the realization that orcs, often dismissed as mere monsters, possess a surprising depth rooted in their social structures and familial bonds. Tolkien hints at this in the Silmarillion, where he reveals that orcs breed after the manner of the children of Ilúvatar, implying that, like other races in Middle-earth, orcs form families and communities. These moments of tenderness and grief suggest that, despite their brutal existence, orcs are capable of genuine emotional connections. They are not simply mindless brutes. They experience loss, seek comfort, and strive to maintain some semblance of community in a world that views them with nothing but hatred. However, this complexity does not erase the darkness that defines their society. Even in their expressions of care, there is an ever-present undercurrent of violence and savagery. The orcs' communal bonds are forged in brutality, and their existence is a continuous cycle of survival in a world that offers them no peace. This duality, where they display signs of community yet remain bound to a life of violence, adds layers to their character. They are beings trapped by their own nature and the dark forces that created them, yet they retain the capacity for emotions that make them more than mere instruments of evil. This portrayal invites a deeper reflection on the nature of evil and whether any creature, no matter how corrupted, can be entirely devoid of humanity. The final entry on the list brings together all the tragic elements we've explored. Orcs are victims of a fate they were forced into, not born into. Their existence stands as a reflection of the relentless cruelty of those who twisted them from beings of innocence into what they became. Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion that they were bred in mockery of the Eldar, showing the dark and perverse origins that shaped them. Orcs are not the embodiment of ultimate evil. They are the products of darker forces, their lives marred by torment and suffering. Every act of brutality they commit reflects the pain and fear deeply embedded in them, a desperate response to a world that has used and rejected them. This harsh reality reframes the orcs not as simple villains, but as beings trapped in an endless cycle of violence. Their society, their yearning for a place to belong, and the way they were molded all point to a race that never had a true choice. Their actions, harsh as they may be, stem from the profound suffering they've endured. This suffering demands a measure of sympathy. The orcs challenge the simplistic notion of good versus evil in Middle-earth. Their story is one of profound tragedy, shaped by forces beyond their control. Yet, despite their origins, the orcs have committed countless atrocities, leaving the question of their worthiness of sympathy open to interpretation. The complexity of their existence forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil and the fine line between victim and villain. So, how did you like this new take on orcs? Leave a comment and feel free to give the video a like and subscribe.